So I'll give you a little background about myself, why I want to do this. I'm not sure I'll have enough content for a full hour. I think we'll be able to have a good enough discussion where we will. But this is kind of just ad hoc, which is like, as a speaker, I like having a clearly defined path of being able to talk, but at the same time it's kind of fun because it creates more interaction. So I'm just going to delve into it. This is, what did I title it? Hacking Web Applications for Fun and Profit?
Yes.
Yes. So that's what I do for a living. My name is Eric Fulton. I work for a company called Missoula Group, and what we do is internal penetration tests, external penetration tests, web application tests, and social engineering for multinational companies, which is fun. And it's based in Missoula, which is kind of an interesting little fact. In that when I was graduating from college, I kind of thought I'd have to move to a San Francisco or somewhere on the East Coast, and it turns out they're just right downtown. And the two founders that started are John and Sherry, and they're the ones who I met up with. So myself, I am certified in GIAC web application pen tests. I've been doing it before I was certified in more of a learning mode, if you will. And I take it, like, raise your hand if you're a developer. I'm assuming there's a lot of developers in here. Nice. This is handy because I come from just the attack method. So I straight up hack your applications and then I tell you what's wrong, but I don't really tell you how to fix it. So sorry for that. I'm not overly helpful, but it's also nice that you guys are in the room because I'm going to be talking about a lot of things that allow me to take advantage of your web applications and the underlying host OSs. And it'd be nice to hear from other web developers if they've had that issue, if they protected against it, etc. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools I use too, so that this way you guys can test your own web applications and then make sure that they're secure rather than just putting them out into the world and hoping no one breaks it. Or waiting until someone like me is called in to verify your app, and then you have a ton of things to fix.
Freaking awesome.
Yeah, so let's just jump into it. I'm using right here, someone was asking about this earlier, is Backtrack 5. You don't need Backtrack 5, but you do need Linux for the majority of what you do. I mean, you can get by with Windows, but it's just not as extensible, and Linux is just a good thing to get comfortable with in any case because it's useful, you can automate things through bash scripting, and things just work well.
And they can't hack you back while you're trying to hack them.
False. Linux has just as many exploits, and a lot of people think that Mac and Linux are okay because they're hidden. There's just stuff that hasn't been patched yet. Most applications, most OSs, and if you guys aren't familiar with hacker terms, it's the term ODay, and ODays are basically exploits that no one else knows about. And so a lot of times people hoard their ODays, which you can do nothing to defend against for the most part. I mean, some companies, their entire company is based on trying to predict ODays and block them, but for the most part, if it's not something that's been found and patched, you have no luck. And so where was I going with that? Oh, so for most web applications, there's not too many like ODays per se, and to go on to why I use Linux, there's definitely ODays available for it. So if someone wants to hack you back, they can, and I've got fun war stories about that, but that's neither here nor there. So kind of jumping into it, Backtrack, the reason I like it, it's based off of Ubuntu. Do you guys know what Ubuntu is? It's a very prevalent Linux distribution. I used to use, what was it, before Fedora? Red Hat, like Red Hat 7, 8, 9, which turned into the Fedora project, which is still a good project, but Ubuntu's got the greatest and widest usage, if you will, so it's got tons of great app packages, easy to use, and if you Google anything, it'll be really helpful. And so this is what I use. This is kind of like my arsenal. Backtrack comes preset with a lot of tools in the pen test directory. And so, can you guys see this all right?
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, let's make that full screen. And so, again, let me reiterate, you don't need Backtrack to do this. You can download Ubuntu, Red Hat, etc., and get all the tools yourself. But the Backtrack team has done a really great job in just kind of giving you everything you need for every type of test, which is pretty handy for me, a pen tester, because then I don't have to go downloading things, looking for things. It's just kind of right there. So in terms of methodology, when I attack a web application, what do you normally do first when you do anything in life, when you're about to take on something, a project?
Put on my pants.
Step 1, daily. And then step 2 is you probably want to do some reconnaissance. You want to get a feel for what you're doing, see what's happening. And a lot of times, not necessarily, I wouldn't say bad web app pen testers, but there's a lot of snake oil in the security industry. And so one of the snake oil things is people buy or download these automated scanners, and then that's the test. And so while they're incredibly useful, they're just a starting point. And so one of the starting points that I use is something called Burp Suite. And it's got a funny name. A lot of these hacker tools started out as like a funny project. So when you hear Burp Suite, like it's interesting trying to tell a client, yeah, I hacked you with Burp Suite. And they're like, what? Yeah. But it's actually an incredibly useful tool. So a lot of times, and let me load it up. I've got I don't have a professional version running on here, but you can buy Burp Suite Pro, which has a lot more tools. This is just the open-end version that you can use for free, which is really handy. I'm also hoping this works because I just installed this. Yes. And so it's really handy. I'm also not on a network. So I'm going to take this diversion right now is when learning how to hack web applications, it's very helpful to have specific examples. And there's a ton of projects out there that are there. They create, what is that? They intentionally create vulnerable web applications so that you can test these things. One of the great ones that I enjoy is called WebGoat. It's got a ton of great videos that you can watch so that you can go through and learn about them. And the majority of what I look for through, like with WebGoat and everything else, is something called the OWASP Top 10. And what OWASP is, it's the Open Web Application Standards Project. I'm pretty sure I'm correct on that. And what OWASP did is it's a bunch of developers and hackers alike kind of coming together and trying to see what are the biggest issues in terms of being able to attack web applications. And it's actually really funny with the whole Web 2.0 deal. I mean, before, I don't know, I'm not going to say all of you, but some of you were probably around when the only thing that was on a website was HTML, right? I'm not going to point out the people that were there when that happened, but
I remember Gopher though.
GopherNet was effective, and all the way back to BBSs and etc. Gopher was terrible. But in any case, we evolved a lot of ways. So it used to be you could only attack another person by their host. So you had a lot of people just attacking straight up servers, and then all of a sudden you had these web applications going up. And before it was straight HTML. Straight HTML you cannot exploit. I'm gonna put that one out there. So if your site is like, and actually I can't speak for HTML5. I don't know exactly what all went in there, but as far as I'm aware, CSS and HTML equal secure. It's kind of like having a door. You can't hack a door because it doesn't have any really advanced functions.
You can't have sufficient explosives.
Well, there's no. You can blow up a server too as a done-off service, but you have to stop the line somewhere. So web applications grew from this strict HTML into, I think it was initially like Perl. They're using Perl to make dynamic web applications and CGI.
C-based CGI.
Yeah, CGI, PHP, and we kind of got into our current level of things today. PHP is in high usage. ASP, high usage. Even Python a little bit is in high usage with Django. I don't know if you guys use that or not. Do I have everything? I think there might be some more.
Java.
I have Java. All of those are awesome because they allow you to create dynamic content, rich content that allows users to interact with the website. And that's kind of like the Web 2.0 methodology. You're interacting with these websites. And what's really cool is before you just had this one surface, and again, I apologize, I'm coming from the attacker perspective, maybe not so cool to you, but really cool to me, is all of a sudden you went from a host running a web server to a host running a web server that's pulling in from your backend database management system that might be talking through an API to a business partner that might be tied into something else on your backend, right? So you went from one thing to this great network of things that are all available through a web application. And that's kind of where hackers stopped going and attacking the host systems themselves, and now all of a sudden you've got all these great applications to attack. Now sadly, and again in your case, awesomely, a lot of the major frameworks have patched a lot of issues. WordPress 5 years ago was awesome. They had unfiltered SQL calls, you do SQL injection, XSS, you can steal passwords. Great. They've managed to fix the majority of that. I'm not saying they fixed all of that, but a good portion. So from a hacker perspective, that's annoying. But when you're building your own applications, and a lot of times you have to do a really truly dynamic site that does exactly what you want, you can make some mistakes, and that's where I come in. And so the main thing what I'm looking for, and I took that little off step, is that I'm looking for the OWASP Top 10. And this OWASP Top 10 is exemplified in the WebGoat project. And I was hoping, I couldn't get on the internet, to download it and kind of show you guys, but you can kind of do a take-home with this, go home and play around with it. WebGoat is a Java package. It's a server kind of in a box. Don't run it on anything that is important, because you just made your machine vulnerable. But the idea is that it gives you an attack surface to play around with and learn. And so with WebGo, a lot of times what I start off with is I just look at the page. You just kind of open it up. Is there any SSL server issues? I look for boxes. I love any entry boxes. And a lot of times developers think they're really sneaky, and I pull up a thing called tamper data. And another thing that you'll really want to use when testing web applications is Firefox. Firefox is the security testing tool. I just list it as that because it's got a number of great add-ons that are useful for it. So tamper data is one of those. It's a really simple web proxy. You can use other things like Fiddler or Burp for that, but just for like a quick look-see, tamper data. And what it does is it takes and looks in your get and post requests. And I'm sorry, I'm going to be a little over-technical. I'm just kind of assuming you guys are a technical audience. You've got get and post requests to interact with a web page. And so it takes and looks at what your get request is and the variables associated with that, or your post requests. And then it lists them all out, whether they're hidden or not. Okay, now, I don't know why tons of developers think they're really sneaky with hidden fields. I'm kid you not, like just 2 weeks ago I tested a web application where every time they visited the website, it wasn't HTTPS, it was just HTTP. They had the username and password replied back in the get and post field. I think it was using post in a hidden field. And I was like, this is ridiculous. And we can kind of get a little bit out of scope into network-based attacks in that the reason that's bad is, I mean, if you're at your house and you're directly connecting to the website, there's a really good chance that it won't ever be stolen, right? It's okay that you're in clear text because your house goes to your ISP. Supposedly you trust everything in between. Your ISP goes to the website and you trust the entire transmission line. But where it gets a little hairy is if you're at the break, right? Because if you're at the break and I'm sniffing traffic, I don't have to do anything to you. I can see your username and password just in the get and post request going across my machine.
What's the break? Sorry.
Oh, it's a coffee shop. Sorry, yeah, if you're not from here, sorry.
No,
Now you wouldn't know.
the first
The break. Sorry.
Fulton local knowledge test.
You did get your pants on today, though, right?
Failure.
Number one.
Step 1 is down, 2 through 5.
No shaky.
Sorry, so that example, the break is a coffee shop, and most coffee shops have open Wi-Fi. And tons of people love doing silly things like connecting via unsecured FTP, unsecured websites, unsecured everything, so that people, not like me, I'm a white hat hacker, but maybe people less
darker glasses.
with darker glasses
And darker hats.
and darker hats. I'm assuming you guys know the white hat, black hat, gray hat methodology. But anyone with a hat that's not white, that's looking on data that's not theirs, they can collect your passwords, your usernames, etc. And what's really funny is a lot of times people with admin access log on to things via Wi-Fi. And so I'll say this within the scope of my testing, I do a lot of different types of testing because companies want to see how they're vulnerable. And so one of the tests I did was just a Wi-Fi test. They just want to make sure that their Wi-Fi was secure, but it was an open-ended penetration test. And when we do a penetration test, the idea is that we want you to test the Wi-Fi, but if you are able to break into it, how far can you go, right? And so it's really fun for me because when things are that widely scoped, if it's closely scoped, it's like, can you break the Wi-Fi? Then I have to stop, right? Like, I get your password, but then I have to stop. This company had an all-out access pass of, hey, your endpoint vector is the Wi-Fi, go from there. And if I had spent like 5 days just trying to hack Wi-Fi, that would have been silly for me, but the company would have loved it, right? But essentially what I did is that they had WPA2 running, which, okay, good standards. However, WPA2 is vulnerable to a password attack. So if you get the WPA2 handshake, you can run it against a list of known passwords. And you can check the hashes, kind of like you do with traditional password cracking. This company used a really, really silly short password. So boom, I'm on their Wi-Fi. So now that I'm on their Wi-Fi, what can I do? Well, again, they were kind of smart. What they did is they segmented their network. That's another best practice, right? So the Wi-Fi network, I couldn't access anything else. I couldn't, so I'm using hacker tools is like Nmap. I'm trying to check and see what servers I can get access to. Not many, but I can get access to the servers because a lot of times servers have to be accessible in multiple environments to do Kerberos radius authentication type things. And so from there, I'm on to their Wi-Fi. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's start sniffing. And some more tools that'll be helpful to you guys is TCP dump. That's still showing. So I think this will, oh, right. No, this is the Mac. Sorry, I just got this Mac, so I'm getting used to it. Oh, and I'm not running anything, that's why. But you can use the TCP dump. There we go. That should work. Boom. I have to enter my root password. Yeah. Again, if you're doing testing on network-based levels, it's really nice to have a machine where it's your host OS. VMware, if you, I didn't maybe mention this, I'm using VMware from a Mac, so it has some issues interfacing with the ports. But if I'm looking right here, it looks like in my Mac, I'm trying to broadcast and find other people on the network. Okay, and I can watch that. And if you want something a little bit more visual, Wireshark is another really good tool for capturing and viewing packets.
It's like Ethereal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's
It is
the Ethereal project
the
broke
new
off.
name.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Ethereal, I think there was an issue with the developers or the company that bought it.
It was the name was trademarked is what it ended up being. They just changed the name. Same exact everything. And they just had to change the name due to trademark issues.
Yeah, you just give away your age, sir. I'm just kidding. Yeah, it was Ethereal a long time ago. But both of those are good for capturing packets. And so if you've got someone using an unsecured connection and they're broadcasting as is with Wi-Fi, you can all of a sudden see, oh, I'm logging into an unsecured website. And what's really funny is they had an internal time server. Do you guys like keep track of your hours at work on like some sort of server someone set up? There's a really popular one. I can't think of its name.
FreshBooks. It's an online one.
Could be FreshBooks. There's one that people set up, Jira. You guys ever heard of Jira?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
A lot of people use Jira. Jira, when misconfigured, doesn't secure anything. And so I caught one of their developers logging onto Jira, and he had domain access credentials. And so from there, I was like, this is almost too easy. I was able to log onto the domain controller, add my name, download the hashes, crack the hashes, and have access to their entire system. And that's just their Wi-Fi that was secure. So, I mean, potentially I made it so far, but I could have been stopped had they been using a secure connection. And now I digress. There's something called SSL strip that I could use that would strip that, but there's also protections against that, which is force HTTPS. But not very many websites are doing that right now. So going back forward, just looking at the packets, that's one way of seeing when you're getting post requests aren't encrypted, of looking at it. So a lot of times I just look and see what traffic's going on. Then I move on to Burp Suite. Burp Suite is really handy in that it's an inline proxy. And so essentially what I mean by that is that you've got your web browser, and if I open up Firefox, maybe I don't want to open up Firefox. Oh, no, that's okay. Just kidding. I use a tool called Foxy Proxy because it automatically switches between proxies pretty fast. Or you can actually go into the, I haven't done this in a while, preferences, security, there's an advanced network, connection settings. You use a proxy. See, that's just a lot of work to like change proxies if you're changing proxies all the time. Foxy Proxy is really handy. But what you do is you set your proxy to your local host and you set it to a certain port. And basically what that does is if this is Firefox, then you route Firefox through Burp Suite, and then that routes Burp Suite to wherever you're going from there. And so Burp Suite will capture anything that you go to. And if I can pull it back up. So now that you've got Burp Suite as your proxy, something that you're going to fall into. And am I done at 2 or am I done at?
2:30.
Oh, okay, I got time.
You have 3 minutes.
Panicking and rushing when you didn't need to.
Yeah,
This is the test.
I was making too many jokes earlier on. So a lot of times what will hamper people when you're looking at this interface is you just you don't understand the system of how it works. You kind of look at it and all of a sudden your Firefox isn't working. I'm going to tell you this right now if you decide to do this, and I did it myself so many years ago. You go to proxy and then you turn intercept to off.
Otherwise, it stops you.
Yeah, otherwise it's just going to, so Firefox queues up your request to Burp and Burp just waits on it and is like, do you want to forward it? Do you want me to hold on to it? It's kind of stuck in a little like purgatory, if you will. So you want to turn that off, and from there, as you browse around a website, if you just browse around it in Firefox, Burp will start picking up everywhere that you're going. It's watching all of your traffic and seeing what sites you're visiting, what kind of requests are made, etc.
I've used it a lot as just a debug tool, especially if you're trying to debug like an Ajax
Yeah.
site. It's a lifesaver if you're trying to, see what's going on without necessarily having, Firebug installed or something like
Exactly.
that. Or if you're running a browser that you can't, like IE or something.
And
like
USD developers are using stuff like Ajax and JSON calls. That's a lot harder to proxy and watch. So that's where another time where that comes in handy is because I can see your JSON requests and modify them in line, because sometimes Burp, it's pretty Web 2.0, but it's not perfect at it. If you got a Ruby script that's like constantly updating the website, sometimes it doesn't catch it. So that's again where Firefox becomes your best hack tool, is that your browser's the end-all interactor with the website, so it's got all the content and data. So after you browse for a while, it'll start listing out. And a lot of times you'll get like a huge list of websites that you didn't even go to, and that's because a lot of cross-linking goes on between websites. And so it doesn't actually spider those other links, but it captures every link that's on their website. And so if you're trying to search bar.com or foobar.com, it'll have foobar, but if on foobar you link to Facebook, Twitter, MySpace, all that stuff that no one ever pays attention to, it'll show up in your left sitemap. And you don't want to scan Twitter. I mean, I've never had them yell at me when I've accidentally done it before, but these companies are definitely paying attention when you're like essentially trying to hack into them. So what you want to do is limit your scope a lot. And so this is still under the target tab. And so in the scope, things that are included in scope, it can do variables, and it's really easy. You can just right-click on the URL, say this item is in scope, nothing else is, and then you're good. And after you've done things for a while, and it's all done from here, and I'm sorry I don't have a more interactive example, I kind of just thought of this morning. I'm giving the presentation. But once you've got a website in scope and that's in here, you can right-click on it and send it to the spider. So if we go again to the top tab, you've got a spider, and basically this follows all the links following your scope. So if you've got a link to Facebook, it ignores it, but if it's to foobar.com/index.php, it'll go to that. So now I've got kind of reconnaissance of every web page you have, every web directory you have that's linked to. And while I'm doing this, I run a separate tool because, again, everyone thinks they're sneaky, and they oftentimes hide things in crazy folders. Wait, wrong one. In folders that aren't linked to that no one knows about. Like, you have no links to your /admin, but it's there, right? And you don't want anyone to be able to log on to your, or like even be able to see your admin screen. So what I do with Dirtbuster is
through obscurity, they call it.
Exactly.
Or at least in the industry we call it.
Yeah, or you might not even think about it, is I take a list of, and I generally use the big list, and again, I might reiterate, only do this against your own applications, and when you're doing testing on web applications, watch your logs, because I've figured out, but it's a learning experience. You can denial of service a website by blowing up their log. Some companies, like, they put their log directory on a separate folder, or a separate partition, and they only allot, like, oh, I'm never going to get more than 2 gigs in logs, until some random jerk comes along and throws, like, a 13 million list of URL guesses, each of which are being logged. So, that's another side note. But basically, I go through and I take, this is ordered and done by the OWASP project of the most prevalent web directories that are used. In terms of really silly things that I've seen, /admin, where there's no security at all. But what's even more funny is someone will be like /admin with a login page, right? So you think /admin / index.php, and then once you log in, you either do an auth token or some other way to authenticate, and then you're at that page. But some web developers, I'm not sure if there's just this website, you could just, if you knew the directory that was after admin, you could just enter it and have access to all the admin tools.
It wasn't protected by the login.
Yeah.
You didn't check for the auth code later or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, and I feel for you guys, because you have so much to pay attention to.
No, that's not.
No
excuse for that.
There's no excuse for that.
Okay, well then there's no excuse for that.
There really isn't.
But while I'm spidering into that, I'm also going to be hitting you with every possible directory I can, trying to find all the secret stuff that you have. And a lot of people, like, you might be the web developer, but you don't manage the server, and a lot of people just leave random directories from old years on there. And I know this, again, this will kind of date things, but in 1997 there was a script called PHF, or PHF I think, that university used. It was kind of like an original directory server, if you will. And it was a CGI, and it ran at universities, and basically all it was is you did CGI, ? and then the name, and then it would list if it was there or not. Funniest thing, and I mean, I tell you, this has been there since like '98, and I found this in 2010. That very application allowed you to do straight calls to the console. So rather than doing PHF ? Equals name, you just enter ls, and then it'll return a listing of the current directory that it's in. So
You still run into that one occasionally too.
and I tell you, my favorite is cat Etsy password, cat Etsy shadow. Because those two things in Unix terms are, show me all your usernames and all your passwords that are hashed. Or not hashed, depending on how silly you are. Most of the time it's hashed. Exactly. And a lot of times what's also fun is if you can wget the SAM file of Windows servers, because then you can download the SAM file and crack all the hashes there. But people just, I mean, what I was trying to point out there is people leave old things that are vulnerable forever. And so,
I mean, it's there and it's not killing anything. So you delete it, you might break something.
exactly. Well, and so to tie in with that, so you're developing a new Web 2.0 app, but it's on this server that you've kind of like upgraded throughout the years. You have the most secure app available, right? And some jerk in 2000 left this script that let me root the box without even touching your server, right? So these two are very important for reconnaissance because they show you what folders are available on the server, whether security through obscurity or if it's a multi-hosted site. They allow you to see where every link goes, so you'll find pages that you didn't see. And then after you've spidered it, and my personal favorite, you'll send it to the intruder. Oh wait, not the intruder. Just kidding. Oh, all right, that one's grayed out. That's why I was skipping it. Is the scanner. And the scanner's grayed out because I have nothing to check right now. Scanner, for me, is great because there's a ton of different ways I can break web applications. SQL injection, command line injection, OS injection, cross-site scripting, just off the top of my head, right? So there's a ton of these that I could do, but for me to test each one on every one of your pages is a bit ludicrous. So what basically Burp Sweep does is it takes every possible injection parameter and then it tries it with like 400 or 500 different tests. And then I can just leave, grab a coffee, come back a couple hours later and see, oh, you've got SQL injection here, you've got this here, you've got this here. Which is super handy. That's lazy me. A lot like, and I'll say, as a pen tester and as a hacker, you just take the low-hanging fruit first. So I'm not even going to try. If I see that you got a SQL injection, I'm just going to go for that, even if it's on my automated scanner. Now, a lot of companies that are working a little bit harder, it might not show up on Burp. They might do more sophisticated calls. It might not be in the URL parameter in the get and post, because that's the majority of what Burp does. It might be in a JSON request. You might have a SOAP backend that you think is secure. You might have a lot of things. And that's where it comes in handy as a manual tester. And I'm not going to get into some more of that advanced stuff because it'd be nicer to have examples for that. But if we took the lowest hanging example of SQL injection, okay? Are you guys aware of what SQL injection is?
Yep.
And for those who aren't nodding their heads, SQL injection is where, let's say you've got a search box on your web server, okay? What it's supposed to be used for is it queries the backend database and says, is this whatever I'm searching for in this table in this database? And you guys all know the SQL code. I might have done that out of order. But
Johnny drop tables.
Yeah.
and if you read XKCD, Little Bobby drop tables, it'll get you every time. And I'd recommend XKCD as a fun comic to read anyways. But in essence, basically, if you just add a single quotation, if the web server doesn't either turn that into an HTML safe character, or if it doesn't, escape it, yeah, properly escape it, then I have direct access to your database. And then what I do is and as a tester, I never drop tables.
Thank you.
Poor form.
Party foul, yes.
Yeah.
Tester definitely.
However, if you guys ever read, and if you want some fun reading, I would say, what is it? Zero for Owned is a web e-zine, and those are like kind of the hackers that want to prove what they have, and they always RMRF and drop tables. So you always want to keep, that's another reason to advocate for backups, daily backups.
At least daily, yeah.
At least. But again, I digress, is basically SQL injection allows you to have command over their database. And this is where it kind of helps as a web app person to talk with the person who's administrating your OS box, is because as a web app, you might think you're secure, but let's say that you have an issue, right? Well, if you've done things correctly, whoever's running your server is running your web server under an Apache-specific user that's got limited rights on that box. Most people create, like, I don't know, they run Apache under root, which is just silly, because if I'm able to get access to that user, and I see some of you are like, no! If I'm able to get access to that user through the web application, then I have full root access to your server. And if I have root in your environment, that's not good.
I think people have to go out of their way to do that now.
The default is nobody or dub on everything out there, but there are still a lot of
often
people out there
People are idiots.
because
That's true.
because their application just doesn't work. They go in and change the user and group inside Apache to root.
And might I
If my
say,
application doesn't work, well,
one of
it's
my-
a permissions issue.
if I can
fix.
impart one thing to this crew right here, please never have default passwords, ever, ever.
What,
I-
you mean admin password isn't a good password?
I know. I tell you what. I like more than enough. Like I like to think of myself as like a master of my craft. I can do really cool, shiesty things, but I never get to use them because I see that. Because, like I said, I'm lazy, and when I see that you've got DBMS password is password, I'm done. So Never use default passwords. Never use easy passwords. Always use alphanumeric symbolic. If you can in applications, please use, instead of hard-coded passwords, what is it, tokens? Secure tokens? I don't know if anyone does that. Or a way of implementing the back end. It makes it more fun for me. And harder for hackers, is where I'm getting at with there. But there's some other stuff that you can do with burp other than being lazy and using the intruder. And while I'm at this, there's also Acunetics. There's some really good automated scanners if you just want to throw stuff at your web app. There's Acunetics, there's Burp Suite, there's the IBM one, Rational App Scan, which is crap. But that's just personal.
It's not just personal. I think that's the overall opinion in the
Yeah.
industry too. It's just
And
not
there's
very good.
there's Web Inspect from HP, and I like Web Inspect better than AppScan, but I find Acunetics and Burp Sweep are all I really need to use. But if you want to like make sure you're ultra secure, just run it through all of them. But some other stuff I can do are these other tabs that I've got. And so with the intruder, I can choose what positions in your post request that you've got, and then I can also choose my payloads through a list of payloads. Now, a lot of this, it used to be, if I wanted to, like I would have payload scripts to where if I found a post request that would allow me to do like OS command injection, I would want to go through and like just go through every directory possible, list out what's in it, so I can kind of get a feel of what I'm doing. These are, yes, less useful now because of Metasploit. And are you guys familiar with Metasploit? Oh, I love Metasploit. So let's take a look at Metasploit. And if you want some just fun side projects, this is all fun stuff to learn. There are vulnerable web applications. Set up your own box to attack because it's entirely really illegal to hack other people's stuff. And in your job, get permission. So if you run a web application and you want to run all this stuff at it, check with your managers first, unless you are the manager, because then it's a win. But I go back to Metasploit. There we go. I was trying to think of the word. So going to Metasploit is 99% of what I go to. So when you hear of like super elite hackers, it's kind of been the industry as it is, the security industry has kind of been moderated in the fact that there's way too many companies that need security experts, and there's way too many base issues, like really easy issues that you should patch before getting a security test. I mean, does that make sense?
Yep.
And so a lot of times you'll see in the movies, or even you'll hear, like breaking into a secure government facility, they used an O-Day to break in, and then they were using ICMP tunneling to get information out. Like, yeah, and actually, have you guys heard of the APT? Advanced Persistent Threat? Okay. And again, an aside. So the Advanced Persistent Threat is kind of like the huge threat to the U.S. right now. They think it's from China. It might not. If you Google it, there's a ton of news articles on it. But the basic idea is that someone is attacking U.S. companies consistently and often. I know Google was taken down, well, not taken down, but they almost got to the source code of Google, Adobe, Microsoft, RSA, Sony, major companies that you would think would have the finances to protect their stuff.
This was the most recent Sony one, too?
Yep. But they blame the APT. I'm kind of on that. It's just kind of a scapegoat. RSA was most definitely APT.
I think Sony just pissed everyone off and kind of is getting what they
Yeah, after they went after GeoHot, they were a target. But the APT is a group of people that are using the newest exploits as they're published, rarely O-Days, because they don't have to. They're using covert information tunneling. They're getting deep into the most advanced secure facilities around. And if they're getting into those, you're kind of at a loss for being able to protect yourself. But at the same time, there's so much lower hanging fruit that could be used to attack you. You might as well go for that. So the APT, what was getting to is, I don't, like, as a pen tester, I don't have to create a custom exploit for Joomla. I don't have to review the source code of WordPress and find a really crazy cool issue, because most of the time there's something already available. And that's where Metasploit comes into.
How do you spell that?
Metasploit, M-E-T-A-S-P-L-O-I-T. And it's again almost cheating. Like it's almost too easy doing things these days, because Metasploit it's the idea that it's a framework for you to build. And are you guys? I guess I should take are you guys more familiar with like the way to attack web applications and host operating systems? Maybe I'll get a little more into that. So there's a number of ways that you can attack a host operating system, and this ties in with web applications in the idea that a vulnerable web application leads to a host-based exploitation, which leads to data exfiltration, which is the number one thing you're trying to stop. or someone just hating on you and deleting your tables. So what Metasploit does is it creates a package of the whole process to be used. So a lot of times there's an initial exploit. So if we look at it, we can use an exploit, and there's a ton of possibilities in here already. So there's a ton of Linux. You'll see Linux HTTP, MISC, etc. And let's go down to a let's do JBoss. Do you guys use JBoss?
I know people that do.
Exactly. A ton of people do. It's like IBM's Big Iron web application, wouldn't you say?
Hosting environments, a container for Java servers, Java applications, a framework type thing. So
Yeah, and I absolutely love...
bigger companies more than smaller ones, which is the irony. So
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot larger. And as you can see, there's just tons of all-around crazy things to use. Like I've got Oracle 9i. If you look through, you can see every exploit available. You can see almost every exploit available, and most of these are culled from the exploit DB. So if you want to see if your framework, I know Joomla, there was a guy giving a Joomla presentation, and Joomla's just had it hand it to itself time and time again. And if you look on here, and if you pay attention to the exploit DB, you'll see when a new exploit is out to attack one of those frameworks or one of those plugins. So I'm going to go ahead and use a Windows exploit that is an HTTP exploit that... let's do Apache mod rewrite for LDAP. Let's do rewrite, boom. So I'm now using this exploit. So if you've got this vulnerable mod rewrite and you're using like for LDAP authentication on your Apache server, then, then basically this exploit has been made dynamic so that I can automatically just fill in a couple key points of information, make my own shellcode, and then create a remote shell on your box. All through your vulnerable login. Because your login uses this, I can now exploit it. And so before, what you'd have to do is, and actually let me open up a new tab to show you the code. I think pentests. No. I think it's under exploits. There we go, exploit DB. So before you had to, let's do platforms. Before you had to do a lot of stuff. So if I was to look at one of these files, boom. So this one's already been Metasploitized in that it's got dynamic spots for Metasploit to hook in and change the IP in the 13 places that you have to do. But before, I'd have to take this code that exploits it, and I'd have to look through it, I'd have to modify it, I'd have to put a bit of time into making sure that it worked on your system. I'd have to create shellcode, and shellcode is especially the code that spawns a shell on your server to run it. It basically was like there was kind of a time barrier, because for me to actually attack your company took forever. But now, in Metasploit, all I have to have is your port and your host. It's actually quite unfair. So I can do set our host, and we'll just do a test one. There's no place like home. And you can also use proxy chaining, and that's the other one. It's built in so that I can proxy chain through 13 different proxies, so that it looks like I'm coming from China, and you guys have no idea where I'm coming from. So it's got a lot of things built in. So now if we show options, I can use proxies, but I'm not going to. If there's a vhost that I specifically want to attack, I can do that, but I'm not going to. And the exploit type is automatic. Again, it's really nice. Before, I had to know if you were Windows Server 2000, if you were a Sun box, if you were a different, like a Linux box, because if you try and put Linux shellcode onto a Windows box, it's not going to work, right? So now it automatically tests and finds out. And then here's the second part, is I want to set my payload to, I want to say, is it Windows? Yeah. Interpreter reverse TCP. So basically what I just added there, just through this framework, is a reverse TCP shell. So what's really cool about this is that a lot of companies have firewalls, right? You put a lot about protecting yourself. But what I'm doing here is through web application on port 80, fully allowed by all your hardware, I am sending a payload that will create a reverse TCP connection to me on port 4444, and will connect back to me and open up a remote command shell. Fun. Right? And this is all through your vulnerable web application. Just because you have SQL injection. I think SQL injection is actually one of these options. But so now I can set my lhost. Boom. And now all I have to do is type exploit. And I wish I had something to demo for you, because there's nothing like seeing a shell pop up after a successful exploitation. Maybe not to you guys. But all I have to do is hit enter, do a little root dance, and I now own your machine. So I can now exfiltrate your user databases. What's really fun is like Sony hack. So let's put this in the context of Sony, okay? Sony was basically hacked through their developer network. Someone was able to downgrade their console to a developer version, and the console automatically connected to the developer network. And Sony's like, oh, only developers have these, so let's just pretend like we trust everyone, right? All trust networks are poor choices. And so because it was a trusted network, these hackers could get attacked to this, or could get to this database. They were able to perform a remote OS injection. They now have a shell on it, and now they're looking around on the server through their Metasploit that connected back to them. They can exfiltrate usernames and passwords so that they can elevate themselves to root privileges.
7 million database rows.
Yep. And then they can go, oh, what's this? Every PlayStation user? Change directory, every PlayStation user. Oh, that's like a 20 gigabyte file. Copy. Boom. 3 days later, they have everyone's username, password, address, credit card number.
The fact that they couldn't see that for 3 days.
Did they get the credit card number?
They did.
They did.
Mhm.
Credit card number and hash password.
For everyone.
For
This is why
every
having
single
that little
PSN
vault
account.
token on your server rather than a credit card number is a big deal. Leave that on authorizes and don't touch it.
And this is where probably something that hits home to a lot of you guys if you accept payments is PCI, especially through web.
Yes.
PCI is really tough to deal with. And so a lot of companies have just taken to say, I'm just going to go through PayPal. But you generally, if you're a high volume company, you don't want to do PayPal because they take a large transaction percentage. Yeah. And so you're like, okay, well now I want to accept my own payments. But when you do that, you have to be compliant with PCI. That's a whole beast in and of itself. I pretty much just go around testing PCI environments. And again, I apologize right now. I will send you back to the drawing board.
It's a lot of smoke and mirrors to be compliant. You know, being compliant at most levels doesn't involve much anything. And somebody like him, or anyone who's got a little bit of familiarity with Metasploit and that, can still get into most PCI compliant businesses, because PCI really just at the lower levels just takes a quick look and okay.
Well, and what sucks is if you hire a security company that's smoke and mirrors, you will get a box checked, which, depending on what company you work for, that's all they want. Sometimes a manager's like, I want this box checked, I want to be compliant, don't care what happens. And as secure developers, you're going, whoa, we're not securely storing the credit cards, or like there's loopholes in the language of, oh, if we encrypt it with ROT13, then it's great, right? Which, I don't know, like ROT13 is like a fake form of encryption for you guys that don't know. Or like XOR encryption, they can get around it. And that's why it's really important to pick a security company or yourself work to make it secure, because there's nothing worse than having to be Sony, take your network down for multiple days, lose money, lose credibility, and then people are wary of purchasing with you again.
Buy their stock, by the way.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Just bottomed out.
Oh, it's about to hit rock bottom in about 2 days if all goes to plan.
So you're anonymous.
We are Legion. I'm just kidding. Gosh, this is a room full of people that understand my jokes.
Yeah, welcome to bar camp.
Nice. So a lot of times with a web application, it'll start with just one vulnerable SQL call, one vulnerable anything, and you'll get pwned. And I haven't even talked. That's just SQL. That's going from SQL to root in like 10 minutes. And that's how bad SQL injections are. Now, we can move on to other fun stuff such as cross-site scripting. Right? You guys like cross-site scripting? No. Maybe that's just
I
me.
see you smiling, Nick.
Now, if you ever want to mess with one of your coworkers or someone that doesn't believe cross-site scripting is a big deal, there's something fun for that.
There's an app for that.
There's an app for that. Exactly. It's called Beef. It's what's for dinner. Actually, I haven't used it in a long while. Is it Ruby? Oh, I have to install it. Well, I'm not doing that today. But anyways, what Beef is Beef is a browser hook exploitation framework. And so a lot of times, if you see it when people like prove cross-site scripting to you, it's a little box that says alert, right? And you're like, oh, no one cares about that. And actually, I can actually demonstrate it in here. is a lot of times this is just the test script that I'll use. Boom, right? And so a lot of times my screenshots look something like this. Now it's obviously not in the browser bar because that'll work every time, and I'd look pretty silly if I sent that to someone. But this is equivalent of I inject this into either a stored parameter or a reflected parameter, and boom, I get a little text box. And when I send it to like a lot of CIOs and a lot of like VPs, they look at it and they go, oh, this doesn't matter. So you got a text box they can display, like that's not going to hurt us, and they kind of write that off. However, you guys probably know the true power of JavaScript.
So this is through a get or a post that you would get that JavaScript to display on the page.
Yep.
Or potentially through an email too, if you use
Yep.
like Outlook Express.
or let's think evil, guys. Let's think evil. Osama pictures .bitly.ly. Like do you guys click Bitly links, tiny URLs? Oh my God, I love those.
Yeah.
Because
I don't know what's hiding behind that.
people will just be like, oh, click, and all of a sudden I'll use reflected cross-site scripting. I'll use like XPath injection, any number of things, and I've got your username, your password. And with Beef, you can do so much more fun because then it turns into little zombies that you can do other stuff with. And so a lot of times, like people don't quite understand the implication of cross-site scripting because they just see a little test box. And then when you explain to them, or my favorite onto a story is there was a vice president sitting in his office and he was just staring at me like, it doesn't look like you found anything. I just, this little test box thing. And I was like, and I had like half a day left, but he was like, just wanted to get it done, the exit meeting. And so I was like, there's like, I was trying to explain to him nicely. Because the vice presidents get angry very quickly. Management, anyways. Is essentially, he's like, this isn't really an issue. And I was like, no, sir, it is an issue. By me being able to do that, I can do a number of things. He's like, I don't believe it. And I was like, would you allow me to plug back in? And he's like, fine. And I was like, and do you authorize, and again, when I'm testing, I have many forms for people to sign.
Yes, very specific.
Many forms. I was like, well, this is a little out of scope, so I'm going to have you sign this little form I have prepared, basically allowing me to test this on you. And he's like, oh, fine. Signed it, and I was like, all right, now I'm going to email you a link. And he clicked on it, and all of a sudden I read him his password, and he just stares at me and goes, you've convinced me.
Oh shit moment.
Yep, because I think upper management doesn't quite understand the technology behind what's going on. They just know that they need to have a website that does shiny things and that it has a lens flare. And they don't quite realize everything that goes on in behind it. And actually, you guys probably know as web testers. What is it? Oh, it's the webcomic. I'm just losing it. No, not Panera Arcade. It's the one where he made it's like about bears. There's one about the guy that wants a website and it takes like 5.
Oh yeah.
Oatmeal. The oatmeal.
Yeah,
There.
yeah.
Sorry. How can I forget the oatmeal? There's many great webcomics kind of dealing with what we do, and a lot of times people don't quite understand like, by having that shiny Web 2.0 website that updates, a dog's Twitter feed, that just makes it completely exploitable. Completely. Like, using APIs that you don't understand, using code that you don't understand, installing frameworks without, like, looking at them first can have a lot of issues. Because, and not to hate, because I think frameworks are a good thing. Drupal and Joomla allow you to rapidly deploy a website. But when you just start being like, oh, plugin.x, I'll download that. Plugin over here, I'll download that. You don't realize no one's audited that code, and through, you might have the most secure Joomla ever, but when you install calendar app Joomla...
Are you picking counter app for a reason?
Are you a little nervous, Nick?
No, I had Joomla installed once at actually at the university, and it had a counter application. So it's fun.
Yeah, and
I wasn't gonna out you.
And if
It's all right.
if you go to exploit DB, a lot of times people will just build automated scanners for the whole web. Like, oh, there's a Joomla exploit. Let's look everywhere. And so that's where a lot of times you're like, oh, no one's going to attack me. I'm like University of Montana. Who's going to attack us? Like, really? Who even goes to school here?
Mod West here locally for 6 years, and if you just take any 5-minute sample of their main, what they call the grid cluster now, you take a 5-minute sample, you'll find probably 2,000 to 3,000 attempts along those lines, where they're just random bots, we call them zombies, just hitting, looking for old exploits or even new ones in that,
And that's where we're essentially in an arms race. So a lot of what I do is very specific and pinpointed, and there's not very many people that specifically attack you, right? Because if they have the knowledge, they're getting paid too well to test you legitimately. But a lot of people, and especially in countries overseas, it's an arms race essentially of collecting the most bots, because botnets are huge money in terms of websites to host phishing attacks. And let me tell you, you don't want to be hosting a phishing attack on your website through some sort of any reason. They use your website to host phishing attacks, which actually, funny enough, happened to Sony after they got hacked the first time. They'll learn someday. You don't want to have any of those things because it uses your infrastructure, and then that's where there's a real world consequence.
Hey, the FBI can and may come in and take all your crap.
Yeah. What are your like top
Or
5
Amazon's
or 10
or
Yeah.
most secure open source?
We're lucky our
frameworks?
local FBI office
CMSs,
is a little more savvy than most. I've dealt with, because
Like for playing around and learning, or for attacking?
thankfully
Like
all
that
in a good
people
way.
just readily deploy without considering the consequences.
Oh, people. I would say like Joomla. Not to hate on it, but it's up there. Drupal has done a lot for their security. I think they got an external code review, so they've got like by now, like I said, like 5 years ago, it used to be that you would like just deploy the system and you're vulnerable. Now, if you deploy the core system, they've gone through enough revisions to where they're generally secure. But that's where add-ins come in, and people love the add-ins. I want to be able to display my Twitter feed. I want to display my Facebook feed. Another one up there is forums. There's so many forum packages out there that people are like, oh, I want to install Forum Nuke 12.0, right? Inject.
Another one is a lot of shopping cart apps use very poorly written PayPal plugins. You
Well,
can
that-
get free stuff quite easily through a lot of those PayPal plugins because they don't validate.
And tied in, Zencart, which is like one of the most prevalent carts, was vulnerable like every day. Like it's like, oh, this exploit got patched, new O day. This exploit got patched, new O day. Like you couldn't run a Zencart without getting hacked for a long period of time. And I don't know how that is now. That was like a couple years ago. They might be more
It's gotten
secure.
better, but it's a huge code base that was not very carefully audited.
Is that
as
the
it
one?
was
Is
built.
that still being updated, or is it XCard?
There's OS Commerce.
OS Commerce, yeah.
Those are the two that are kind of interrelated, and they go back and forth a little bit. I think OS Commerce is the much more actively maintained variant now.
And then be aware of features, because PHPBB used to be one of the most secure forums available, and then they added like a method of adding pictures or theming your own template, and then boom. And through some very clever cross-site scripting and some very clever CSS injection, they did some really cool stuff. And it's just through adding one new feature that they were able to stack 1, 2, and maybe 3 different exploits to get where they wanted to go. Because you might parameterize your input, but you might not do it further on, so that if they re-encode whatever they're doing, then it gets passed on, and then it leads to file injection. So yeah, I would say be aware, like most of the time core apps are fairly solid, but you might want to review the code yourself of any add-ins, plugins, anything of that sort.
Ouch.
Yeah. And don't let your users put stuff in. That's one of my, it's terrible when people are like, oh, modify your own HTML.
There's 7,000 plugins you can install.
Yeah. Exactly, and like a lot of forums for the longest time had issues with signatures that would just do cross-site scripting, and then you can harvest passwords and usernames en masse. And now there's tons of browser exploits
It used to be the only thing we had to worry about was the damn blink tag.
and marquee, blinking marquee in glitter. But I digress. So, is there any other questions you guys have? That's kind of like my basic. I didn't show too much on the other end because I don't have anything to attack. Sorry, but. You can use WebGoat, you can use, these tools are all free, and such.
Do you have a list of these tools? I was writing them down.
How possible is it going to be to hack these over a 3G and 4G network coming up in the next?
There's already
Yesterday.
stuff out there that at least over Wi-Fi lets you lift credentials and lift the.
And if I may,
No, I'm thinking
no, if I may,
I'm thinking
if I may,
actual
if any of you guys, are you guys aware of DEF CON coming up?
Yeah.
I've submitted a presentation called, I don't even remember the exact title, but essentially I'm analyzing Android packet captures to see what of your stuff is already leaked out. And if you look at the DEF CON presentations already, there are active exploitation frameworks to where you receive a text and your Android is rooted and owned by someone else.
Through a text.
Through a
Yes.
text.
Wow.
Because the
they
text
click on something in
messages,
the
that's how
text?
the
Nope.
users actually push
By
it
the
out
simple
there.
fact of how Android deals with
Deals
it,
with it, yeah.
you're pwned.
Wow.
You have no chance of
iPhone's the
defending
same way,
yourself.
iPhone runs in Ring O, so it's like once you get access to it, you
iPhone
can
has
have
no
root
privilege
access.
separation at all. iPhone has no privilege separation at all. There is no such thing as non-root in iPhone.
Just like the Apple TV, that's why it's so fun to hack.
And actually, if I may use something to hype this up, so the company I work for, and I try to kind of keep this out for the most part, it's called Lake Missoula Group. But we also run a thing called Forensics
I
Contest.
work with Jonathan Ham.
Yep, forensicscontest.com. And basically it goes through network forensics of what's going on the wire through PCAP captures and what you can find. And one of those was actually called Anne's Bad Apple TV. And it showed you how you were able to intercept the packets of what she was searching for and take a look at. And some people wrote some really cool tools of being able to inject what people were doing, acting as inline proxies through ARP poisoning, and a lot of fun stuff. So if you're interested in that, we've got a current contest running, and it deals specifically with Wi-Fi and a packet capture off of that. I'm not going to give too much away. But if you win, we've got a wireless router up for grabs.
As long as it's not a Linksys.
Yep. Oh, and it's funny, even embedded firmware solutions, to give more stories out, like you guys are probably aware, through, was it Crosspath or Reflected, what was it? I'm losing my words here. But essentially they were able to, through poning you on one tab in your browser, if you had logged into your Linksys router, they were able to execute on your behalf a command on your wireless router to change its password or update firmware halfway, aka bricking.
Yeah.
That's just me, though.
There's also a similar set of hacks that use that same sort of thing to help to identify physically where a particular customer is and which specific machine behind a NAT even
Well,
that they were talking to.
And cell phones are where the next level of things are going, because right now, if I'm able to pwn your cell phone, I know where you've been for the last 3 months. Unless you
Or if you
update
got
it,
an iPhone,
but
then
always read iPhone's terms of service. So,
The only thing that's keeping phones a little bit safe right now is the barrier to entry of 3G and 4G sniffers, but that's coming down every day. The hardware's getting cheaper and easier to implement. It's a
And
matter of time.
another fun project is the femtocells. Femtocells are little wireless networks for your cell phone. And
Linux.
no, and that's where I'm getting. So another research project of ours is you can totally sniff network traffic through your own, like it's illegal if you're sniffing someone else's, but you can sniff your own network traffic of your cell phone, and there's a lot of interesting stuff on there. But again, do not play on networks that aren't yours, do not play on web apps that aren't yours, but there's a ton of great frameworks where you can test it for yourself.
Make a sandbox and have fun.
Yep, so thank you.
Thank you.